I actually feel really good about how the News Nation spot went, and even better considering that it was on a very few hours of sleep and 20 minutes after I'd slammed a shot of Irish whiskey. Uh, but uh, but yeah, this is excited to share this with you guys.
It doesn't happen often that a prominent American dies, and many in the public and the media dance on his grave. But with the death of Henry Kissinger, the former Secretary of State, National Security Advisor under President Nixon, Ford, counselor to 12 presidents who passed away last night at the age of 100, many are doing just that. Kissinger is credited with opening the door for U.S. relations with China, easing tensions with the Soviet Union, but also for overseeing the end of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. He won the Nobel Prize for overseeing the peace talks, but was also criticized for expanding the war to Cambodia and Laos, leading to the deaths of tens of thousands, they say. And he's accused of prolonging the war long after the U.S. knew there was no winning. He also helped orchestrate the overthrow of democratically elected governments abroad, including Chile and Argentina. And needless to say, this is a man with a complicated legacy. And while most have been at least somewhat reverential in their coverage of the fact that he died, others were not at all. Rolling Stone, for example, published an obituary where at the top reads, "Good riddance." The headline says, quote, "Henry Kissinger, war criminal beloved by America's ruling class, finally dies." Underneath, "The infamy of Nixon's foreign policy architect sits eternally beside that of history's worst mass murderers. A deeper shame attaches to the country that celebrates him." The article then goes on to compare Kissinger to Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh, except they say Kissinger killed more people. Not to be outdone, the Huffington Post published this headline, quote, "Henry Kissinger, America's most notorious war criminal, dies at 100. The titan of American foreign policy was complicit in millions of deaths and never showed remorse for his decisions." And on Twitter, also savaged Kissinger, including an account created 2 years ago dedicated solely to asking whether Kissinger is dead yet, tweeting simply, "Yes," shortly after the news was announced. Others calling him monster, evil, etc. Is it really warranted? Now, we don't generally do debates on this show, right? Usually I'll just take someone on. But on this one, we did want to hear both sides. So joining me now is Sumantra Maitra. He's senior editor for the American Conservative. He wrote a piece about Kissinger today entitled "Historian More Than a Statesman." And Ben Burgis. He's a progressive commentator and host of the show Give Them an Argument with Ben Burgis. He's also penned an op-ed for the Daily Beast titled "Henry Kissinger Was One of the 20th Century's Greatest Monsters." Welcome to both of you. Ben, let me start with you. Are you troubled at all by the idea of dancing sort of on the grave of a guy who spent most of his career in public service for the U.S.?
I'm not troubled by dancing on the grave of somebody who was very openly involved in the overthrow of a democratically elected government in a country that the United States was not in any way at war with, who said things like, "I don't see why Chile should be allowed to go communist just because its people are irresponsible," talking about the democratically elected democratic socialist president Salvador Allende, the guy who expanded the war to Cambodia and personally oversaw an indiscriminate bombing campaign that killed 150,000 civilians and destroyed that country so utterly that a pretty direct consequence of that was the rise of the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot's killing field, a guy who backed the genocide in East Timor. These are real serious historical crimes, and it seems a bit much to ask us to have more compassion for the architect of those crimes than for those millions of people who were victims of his of what he did all around the world.
That's a good start. Hard to imagine what the what the counter argument is, but yeah, I think I can't even tell that you had just, or maybe I can tell that you had just taken a shot, because that might be where you actually operate at your best. After a shot of whiskey to loosen the rhetorical firepower. But yeah, it was a good start, and I like that they shouted out this show. As a producer note, they had a really good graphic. So I'm I'm happy with your performance all around so far. Round one to you. Although I guess the other guy hasn't started.
Yeah. He's about to go in the next segment we're going to watch. But it is an interesting, it's like, I mean, before we start watching like his response, in the next chunk of the debate, like, it is kind of interesting because it's like, given the stuff that was just listed off, you'd think that really the only possible defense of Kissinger would be, no, that stuff didn't happen. Right? Like in other words, like if you're going to say, no, this was actually a good guy, then presumably it's got to be like, no, something that you just said is not accurate, right? Because like if all of that is accurate, like, that kind of seems like the end of the discussion. But I don't really hear a clear denial in what you're about to hear.
It should go like the argument clinic from Monty Python, where it's just like, Kissinger did all this stuff. No, he didn't. He did not.
I guess the only thing he could the other type of argument, this is all just in a vacuum, but not really what Kissinger did, but you could say that he was responsible for millions of civilian lives, but he saved over like more, right? Like the kind of argument that people give for the atomic bombs, right? Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that like a ground invasion would have been worse or something like that. Those are tough arguments to make, but I guess that's the other way that you could go with it.
Well, let's see what he does.
Sumantra, I mean, look, if that were true about Henry Kissinger, right, if he was truly one of the most evil men, which is the way it's characterized by many on the left in particular, to sort of ever be in power, not just in the United States, but anywhere in the world, I could see then the response being warranted. What's your response?
Well, first of all, the Kissinger being the architect of mass murder is an accusation that has been brought both from the neoconservative right and the far left, Jacobin, for example. It's interesting to see someone who can appeal to both sides in such a revered and reviled fashion. The fundamental, the basic of the question is this: Kissinger was operating in a scenario where America was facing at that point of time its greatest strategic challenge, with the Soviet Union and China having leading the communist movement. Kissinger, because he grew up in a country which saw the rise of Hitler, which saw the rise of democratic tyranny in a way. My colleague here is, writes for the Jacobin. He obviously understands what happened when passions of mass movements takes over. So he understood what happens, what happened in the scenario. He studied Metternich, and he was operating in a scenario where he was facing fundamentally three challenges. One, that Soviet Union and China was having sort of like a split between them, and he had to exploit that situation because it was in America's strategic interest. Now, whether that was good or bad is a different question altogether. But fundamentally, that had to be done because it was a challenge in front of the United States. Second, there was a war going on in the Middle East, and peace needs to be done. Kissinger was, in fact, one of the only person who the Arab sides, in fact, wanted to be in the peace process because they trusted him more, and they didn't think that he would support the Israelis, on its own. Number two. Number three, he started the peace process with Vietnam, which essentially led to the withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam. Now, whether he has done bad things or whether he has, I find it interesting that, the word complicit is always used, which I don't really understand what that means. Like, did he direct Pakistanis to commit mass murder in Bangladesh? No, he did not. He didn't stop them. But again, he was operating within a scenario where India was a Soviet client state. So we have to understand that all the accusations that Kissinger essentially faces does not answer the question whether it was plausible, whether it was expedient, or whether it was moral.
Okay. First thought about that, rewatching this, is that I don't actually hear a denial about any of the three instances that I mentioned, right? I talked about the overthrow of Salvador Allende in Chile and Kissinger's role in that. which I would have been very happy to expand on if anybody wanted to go back on it. Go back to it at any point in the rest of the segment, which nobody seemed to, although I do bring it up again in the part we watched the cold open. The bombing of Cambodia, right? Did not hear a denial about either his role in it or the civilian death toll. We do argue about Cambodia a little bit in the last section we're going to watch, but he doesn't deny that there. And he doesn't say a word about East Timor, which, by the way, in proportional terms, I mean, it's a small country, so but like 20% of the population of East Timor died after the Indonesian invasion that was backed by Kissinger and Gerald Ford. That, proportionally speaking, that's the largest genocide of any nation since the Holocaust. And he doesn't mention that either. What he does, I mean, it kind of strikes me as very pre-canned. Like, he kind of sort of came up with the things that he was prepared to defend Kissinger on. So there's like a bunch of stuff I didn't mention. So there's like his role in like peace process between, well, not Israelis and Palestinians, but like Israelis and, other Arabs and like Arab states in the Middle East. There's like kind of, I think, a reference in there somewhere to the Yom Kippur War and his role in there, and a sort of defense of Kissinger on Pakistan, which I didn't mention. Although even there, right, like he says like, oh, it's interesting the word complicit is always used. Well, I sure didn't use it, right? I didn't say he was complicit in the genocide in East Timor. I said he backed the genocide in East Timor. In other words, when Kissinger was essentially, the co-president for foreign affairs, right? Like, which is really the level of power that he had in the Nixon and Ford administrations. I mean, he was simultaneously holding the offices of Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, which nobody has done before and since. And he also exercised a lot of personal power over foreign policy that normally neither of those offices would exercise. Like, again, he was actually selecting targets at the Pentagon for the bombing of Cambodia. He was having conversations about like specific kidnappings and assassinations, in Latin America. But like when he was in that position, like Kissinger and Ford knew a year in advance that the Indonesian dictatorship that the U.S. was backing was planning to invade East Timor. And as the New York Times delicately put it in their obituary of him, there were concerns that the left-wing government of East Timor would go communist, in fact, there's one of Kissinger's aides told him, it would actually violate existing U.S. law for like Indonesia to be using American arms for this invasion. And Kissinger kind of said, "Oh, I know what the law is," right? Like that's. I think that rises beyond complicity. That's actually like, sort of directly assisting, having advanced knowledge of, and not only not stopping it, but like assisting in it happening. Right. So, I mean, that's my initial thought about that. I don't know if you guys had anything on this part.
I would use the phrase riding shotgun.
Yes. Yes, that is a good phrase.
Yeah, I mean, I just to draw attention to like what his argument was. I mean, I just didn't really. Yeah, you're right that he made a few pre-canned arguments that he wanted to make that didn't really have to do with what you were saying, right? But then his language was argue if you want over whether it was good or bad.
Yes, that's what we're here to do.
Right, but he had to. That's what he said. He had to. So he's saying that, kind of in the way that when the doctor, takes the little hammer and hits your knee and you kick, argue if you want whether it's good or bad, but it was a reflex that you had to. He acted like it was a sneeze. Right. Killed all of these civilian people. No, I mean, he's saying from a certain vantage point, that's obviously what America would do. But then you're going back and questioning from the morality that, a lot of people had at the time. And also, even if we want to say that, we thought, even with the benefit of hindsight, maybe we have a new moral sense, you know what I'm saying? Or we could look back at what he did and say whether it's right or wrong. Like you said, it's kind of, I don't know if just presupposing the premise is there's probably, I need to reread logic for the left, but he's just presupposing the idea that the question. That's I think so. Yeah, I was afraid of reading the question and being wrong, but I think that's the question.
Using it the right way, but yeah, I mean that's exactly right. Why? And again, why did he have to? Right? And it's certainly not just the benefit of hindsight. We think it's wrong. I think I'm about to say this in the part we're about to watch, but it's like, there is a reason why it was the secret bombing of Cambodia. I mean, obviously not secret from the Cambodians, but secret from the American public, and initially also secret from Congress, right? Like that it was widely understood at the time that this was not a good thing to do, to just brutally destroy this neutral country because, whatever allegations you want to make, the Viet Cong, we're using it for supply lines and, this and that, right? But this is not, there is a reason why Nixon, didn't just go on TV the night before the bombing started and be like, hey, I'm about to start bombing Cambodia. It's a great thing that I'm doing right now. And I guess the last thing I had on this, just because I don't think this comes up in the last portion we're going to watch, is that he gives Kissinger credit for the eventual peace agreement that ended U.S. involvement in the war in Vietnam, which is a very common thing. I mean, the guy, I would argue, the Nobel Committee made a total mockery of the Peace Prize by giving him one for his involvement in the negotiations. And that's certainly the sort of pop culture received thing, right? I mean, there was like a old Simpsons episode that, where there's a scene with Henry Kissinger in it, and it's he loses his glasses and he's thinking, oh, people can't know that I lost my, I did something this foolish, I who negotiated the Paris Peace Accords. That's the received image of him. But the reality is that the peace deal that Nixon and Kissinger had to take years after the bombing of Cambodia, by the way, was essentially the same one that LBJ had been close to signing in 1968, during his last year in office. And there is some evidence that Nixon and Kissinger worked behind the scenes to sabotage that deal because, it was going to be better for Nixon if the war was still ongoing, and he could use that and all this stuff. And there's pretty direct evidence about the Nixon part of that. There are notes from his aide H.R. Haldeman where he quotes Nixon, being like, "Yeah, we're going to try to monkey wrench the peace deal." And we certainly know that the sticking point wasn't the Viet Cong or North Vietnam. Or the United States, right? The sticking point was the South Vietnamese not taking the deal, and so it seems like Nixon was encouraging them not to, was telling them that he could get them a better deal if they waited until he was in office. And there's been a lot of debate about how great a role Kissinger had in that process, and there isn't a lot of direct evidence one way or the other, but what we do know is that he was involved and he was talking to Nixon behind LBJ's back, right? That much we know for sure, right? How much of a role he actually played in the monkey wrenching, as Nixon put it, right, is a little up for debate, but he was certainly at least, let's say, complicit, right? Whether or not he was riding shotgun on that one, he was at least complicit. And so when you're saying, well, 3 years after, just this absolutely brutal, mass murderous bombing of a neutral country in 1970, 3 years later, Nixon and Kissinger took the exact deal they'd sabotaged in 1968, more or less. One, I don't really think you can give Kissinger that much credit for peace there. And two, this is it's certainly not a package deal, right? The peace and the thing. And also, and this is what a lot of the remaining segment that, we're still going to watch, part 3 of 3 is going to be about. It's the whole thing. you can't even give him credit for being some Machiavellian master strategist who had this pragmatic understanding of how things worked, because the whole thing was premised on wishful thinking that, oh, if we get rid of these supply lines and shelter in Cambodia, then that'll bring the Viet Cong to their knees and we'll get a better deal and, exit on terms more favorable to the U.S. Nope, that didn't happen, right? You know what did happen? Pol Pot, right? That seems like, if you want to try to draw a contrast between Kissinger, the pragmatic realist, and the crazy neocons, which, by the way, ignores a lot of relevant facts, like Kissinger supported the Iraq War and was advising George W. Bush when it happened, right? But like, if you want to draw that contrast and ignore Kissinger's attitudes towards the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, etc., right? Like, then you have to, like, it's really undermined by the fact that you can say very much like, the invasion of Iraq was based on a lot of wishful thinking about how it would play out. And among the horrors that it led to was the rise of ISIS. I think there's a pretty direct parallel there with Cambodia.
Also, too, the fact that Nixon got away with, sabotaging those negotiations led to Reagan doing the same thing with the Iranian hostage crisis and was it 1980?
That's true too.
Yeah, and again, I don't know if Kissinger actually had anything to do with that particular sabotaging either. But like, the thing is, though, is because of that. Yeah, exactly. There's no evidence, and I'm not going to speculate. However, because of the actions of the first,
we could take that off the list of 200 crimes that that he definitely committed. But
however, because of the first thing happening, directly led to, Reagan wouldn't have attempted that if Nixon and Kissinger got in trouble for that back in the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, this is a general issue, right? That this is kind of why I, as little as I like the resistance lib crowd, I'm kind of on their team on the question of the Trump indictment's been a good thing, right? That I think there's a very long history of presidents never getting punished for anything, and it has really bad consequences. And even if they're like relatively insignificant crimes in the greater scheme of this shit, I think it's a baby step in the right direction for like some ex-president to be arrested for something. I want more of that, not less.
Yeah, even if it's like Obama for jaywalking, like I'd be okay with that,
Oh man, now I want to hear the Michael Brooks like impression skit, of Obama getting arrested for jaywalking. All right, let's watch the last part of the debate.
Well, let me ask you this question, and Ben, let me play this piece of sound from John Kirby today. It does seem to me that this is the way that, when it comes to anyone else, that we would be talking about him if it wasn't for Henry Kissinger, which for whatever reason brings up so much anger. Here's John Kirby today.
It's a huge loss. This was a man who, whether you agree with him or not, whether you hold the same views or not, he served in World War II, served his country bravely in uniform, and for decades afterward, which I think we can all be grateful for and appreciate, just the public service. And again, whether you saw eye to eye with him on every issue, there's no question that he shaped foreign policy decisions for decades, and he certainly had an impact on America's role in the world.
And Ben, it was a similar comment made by President Biden today as well. Is that so terrible to just say you can disagree with him, but we respect the fact that he contributed a lot to a lot of different leaders in this country?
I don't think that would be a terrible way to talk about a deceased person who you disagreed with about what the top marginal tax rate should be. But in this case, what you're talking about disagreements about are real serious war crimes, crimes against humanity. During the final decades of his life, there was a list of countries that Dr. Kissinger could not visit because he was wanted for questioning by authorities there, including close U.S. allies in Western Europe. Like a Spanish judge, for example, issued a warrant for him in connection with the disappearance of Spanish citizens under Pinochet's reign of terror after Kissinger helped to remove the democratically elected president, Salvador Allende. If we're talking about things like Kissinger's notorious instructions to his deputy Alexander Haig for the bombing of Cambodia that killed 150,000 civilians, anything that flies on anything that moves, I would say we're not talking about the realm of normal political disagreements. We're talking about things.
Let me give Sumantra a chance to respond.
Truly criminal and monstrous. But I did just want to say.
Hang on, I'm almost out of time. Sumantra, 30 seconds to respond.
Well, one of the first things which I learned after I moved to the United States is a phrase called Monday morning quarterbacking. Like, it's easy to decide on whether a Secretary of State is deciding on what situation he's facing. I mean, the questions we are seeing now is whether we should have bombed Cambodia before coming out of Vietnam. Absolutely, because that was to show that we are serious about the peace process. And if we don't come out, if Vietnam doesn't give us what we want, then we won't come out and we will stay. So these are some of the things which you have to consider. Now, again, I'm not judging whether it's a good or bad or it's a moral or bad things. Yeah. I'm just saying that you're operating in a scenario where you have to understand the geostrategic question. And you have, I mean, it's easy to be an armchair general, but,
Ben, 15 seconds.
Yeah. This was a crackpot theory of the war in Vietnam. It was based on wishful thinking that the Viet Cong could be defeated, given taking out the shelter in Cambodia. It was a wild violation of international law that had to be kept secret from the American public. There's a reason it had to be kept secret. It was widely understood at the time to be criminal.
Ben, I wanted to make sure you got...
Vietnamese were flying back to Cambodia. They were flying back to Cambodia after attacking U.S. troops.
We could do an hour.
Okay,
this is not a crackpot theory. This is a fact.
Is that the same thing?
Did that happen or not? Yes or no?
But saying that is a fact is not the same.
Did that happen or not?
Yes, but that is not at all the same thing as saying that there's any strategic scenario that makes sense in the real world where that would have made a difference to the outcome of the war in Vietnam. This was a crackpot theory of things.
Burgis and Sumantra Maitra, thank you very much for coming on the program. It was a debate.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just, sometimes, look, everybody knows if you're about to do a peace negotiation, nobody's going to take you seriously. If you don't kill, maybe 150,000 is excessive, but at least like 120 or 30,000 civilians in a different country on your way out. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.